Reading is found in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 1 to 9. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates.
Good morning. Good to see you from up the front here. I get to see all your shining, smiley faces. Yes, I can see all your faces, so don't go to sleep or, anything like that, because I can see you. It's a real pleasure to be here. As Dave said, I have the privilege of working at the support hub of the Baptist Union of Victoria, because the offices, that's not the Baptist Union. You are the Baptist Union. Right? The churches are the Baptist Union of Victoria, a union of over 250 churches, maybe 280 if you count some campuses and different congregations. And you are a part of those meetings that are taking place across the state this morning, as you can imagine, yesterday, in a whole lot of different contexts, in a whole lot of different ways. And so you get to know your place and be encouraged to hear that you're part of something bigger. And the support hub is just the resource to you, and to see you as churches flourish in the places God has planted you. And we get so excited to, as I was saying to Marcel just before, that as I travel around all of the different churches, just to hear what God is up to and see the different ways God is moving in various communities. And as I said, we exist to support you in flourishing and being established in these communities where you're planted. And we're hearing about the initial growth of this church. It started in a house, and now here you are in an inner suburb, which I think you probably were an outer suburb at the time that you started over 50, 60 years ago now. It's great to hear the stories of that. But my particular role is that I get to work with generations and emerging leaders, and that's encouraging our people who are in roles, pastors and leaders who are leading into the generation spaces, kids, youth, families, young adults, and also to encourage churches to be thinking and acting generationally and to be taking up the mandate that we've just heard about read in Deuteronomy 6, to be those who would pass on faith to emerging generations. So that's my joy that I get to do that, and that brings me here this morning to be with you. So as we heard there in Deuteronomy 6, and as you see on the slide, we're talking about generations today. And so when I've been at work in the generation space for, let's not put a number on it, hey? Just the way that you say it is that she's very experienced. It's much better than old, right? But one of the key scriptures that has come for me to be a real heart sort of message in that generation space comes from Psalm 78. And so we're going to spend some time in Psalm 78 and see what it has to tell us this morning. So if you have a Bible, you could open to that, but we're going to sort of read through it together here, or work our way through it. And this psalm it's basically Deuteronomy 6 being lived out, right? Because this psalm was a maskil. It was written by a man named Asaph, who was like essentially a worship leader. It was a form of liturgy. So this psalm would have been one that they either sang or recited parts of as part of their worship. And this is them saying, this stuff is important to us. We want to repeat it and remember it so that it can kind of sink in and have some impact for us. And you see it starts there. My people hear my teaching, listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth with a parable. I will utter hidden things, things from of old, things our ancestors have told us. We will not hide them from their descendants. So they're talking about this idea of grabbing every story that we've heard and every tale that's been told and every witness and testimony that we've seen, and we're going to find a way to tell that. We're going to find the way to express that to the next generation in our context, in our day. And what is the truth that they want to tell their descendants is we will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done. We're going to hear it, we want to say it, we want to know it, we want to remember it, because he is a God who is worthy of our praise, and he's a God of power and ability, and he has done wonders, which is to say that he has put that power and ability and grace to work in the lives of his people. It's happened in the past, it's happening now, so we will tell the next generation. And then he goes on, verse 6, he decreed statutes for Jacob, 5 and 6, statutes for Jacob, and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our ancestors to teach their children, so the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. Lots of generations there. So they would not, so in that space there of these little words that we see, so then there's purpose to why. Like there's a reason for this. It's not just going to tell stories for the sake of telling stories. There's something that's happening here. Verse 7, then they would put their trust in God and they would not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands. This desire is that generation after generation after generation would come to know this God of power and wonders, and that they would come to trust and love him for themselves. That they would know his love and his guidance and protection and his grace and his truth and his justice and mercy and compassion and revelation and light and grace and hope and all the things in their own lives, so that there'd be this flaming baton of faith that we're passing on to the next generation. That each generation would encounter God for themselves and then again endeavour to see faith developed in the generations after them. And then Asaph says, we're kind of getting excited about that. We will tell the next generation. Like, I don't know how they sang it. I don't know what the beat was. I don't know what key it was in. But they're getting super pumped. But we get to verse 8 and it says, so they would not be like their ancestors, a stubborn and rebellious generation whose hearts were not loyal to God, whose spirits were not faithful to him. And you're like, yeah, ancestors, right? Old people, hey, they're always stubborn, rebellious. Yeah, they're not loyal and they're so fickle and forgetful and disobedient and faithless. And then there's this like, whoa, wait a minute. Is he talking about us? Like, are we the ancestors? I've heard someone preach this saying, we are all future ancestors, right? So this is to us. In fact, some translations here say, so they would not be like their parents, right? And you can imagine that kind of dawning of like, oh, he's talking about us. But then if you continue on into Psalm 78, it tells the tale of the meandering path of faith that the Israelites had walked in generations before. It goes all the way back to the Exodus from Egypt and their deliverance there. But then, as we know, that's closely followed by times of grumbling and forgetting in the desert. And then there's years of victory, and then there's years of defeat, and then there's times of deep trust and worship, and then there's times of despair and rejecting God, and it sort of comes and goes and back and forward. And the psalm says all the way till now, which was the time of David. But so they would not be like their parents. So Asaph is exhorting God's people, us, to forge new, vibrant, devoted paths of faith. That each generation would seek to launch the next generation further and deeper in their relationship and walk with God. That with each new generation, there would be a multiplication of voices declaring the praiseworthy deeds of God. That each life would be a testimony, amplifying the truth and the goodness of God. And it's why you and I are sitting here today. Someone told the story, right? And it got to us. Someone kept declaring the goodness of God, and we came to hear it. And so now we sit as part of this continuity of the story. Established generations before us, emerging generations after us, and here we are in the middle. Regardless of how old you are or how young you are, there's some ahead and there's some coming after you, right? All sit in this middle point between generations, called to be part of this mission of passing faith down, passing it along. McCrindle Research is an Australian company that has done a lot of work recently analysing this whole thing of generational trends and understanding the generations. They talk about this thing they call generational intelligence, which is like, IQ, EQ, culture intelligence. Now we're talking about generational intelligence, this new frontier, because what we observe is their work is particularly in the workplace where there's 5 generations working alongside one another, but there's 7 generations alive on the earth. We're starting with the builders to the boomers to X, Y, Z, and then we've started into the Greek alphabet, so alpha and beta. Beta are being born this year, right? So we've got 7 generations kicking on. But this idea you see there, that this equation that our intelligence about generations is the sum of our humility added to our empathy. Humility plus empathy. And the humility piece centres around what they call the peak generation fallacy. This great quote here that says, each generation imagines itself more intelligent than the one that went before and wiser than the one that comes after it. Can I get an amen? Yeah, that's my generation, guys. I don't know what generation you're in, but we are the wise ones and we are the more intelligent ones. But it's true, right? We tend to think that we've kind of our generation, and they call it the peak generation, that we think this generation is the one that's got it sorted. Me, I'm talking about, not you guys. I don't know what your generation did. But humility is the act or the posture of recognizing that every generation was a good generation. Every generation has something to offer. And subsequently, we've all got something to learn from each other in each generation. The humility to acknowledge those differences between the generations, to celebrate those differences, and to celebrate the opportunity that diversity makes possible if we are working together. And then empathy is the willingness of each generation to authentically engage in the search for understanding, to see those differences as the beginning of a discourse. If it's embraced, we could bring far more meaningful connection and purposeful engagement. Humility plus empathy. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord. We will stand in the gap between what has been and what is coming and ensure the continuity of faith. So as we think about that charge on us, some thoughts for us to reflect on, and I really think this is not a scripture or a message that we get to listen to. It's one that we must respond to. It is so, there's an exhortation, there's an instruction, there's a plea to us to be those that would tell the next generation. So what can we do about that? 3 things for us to think about. I think the first thing is that we are called to have a testimony. We're called to have a story to tell of the praiseworthy deeds of God. Asaph says we're to know and declare the goodness of God. So there's a learning that's part of that, in exploring scripture and understanding the precepts of God's law. But there's also this call on us to fuel one another's faith with stories of God's goodness and testimonies of God's activity. Those personal stories of transformation that's happening in our lives because of the activity of God. The examples we've seen, the wonders we've experienced. And I wonder, even just for each of us now this morning, what's your testimony of who God is? Not just, I was saved when I was 11, Like, what's your today testimony of a living, breathing, active, loving, serving, generous God in your life? Where have you seen him at work? What's the story that you have to tell? And when we think about this in the generational context, we talk about emerging generations being like a show me generations. Prove it. You know, you say that God is a God of wonders and is this praiseworthy entity. Prove it. Where is he at work? What difference has he made in your life? Show me a person or a thing or a way that I can understand that. So where's our personal testimony of how God has answered our prayers, or how God has brought us peace in circumstances where peace should not have been possible? You know, how God has allowed us, you know, gifted us this experience of joy despite circumstances we might be in. How has God carried us through pain? These stories of the activity, the wonders, the power of God at work in our life. And I wonder if I was to come around to each of you right now with a microphone, put it in front of your face and say, testimony. I'm not going to. Some of you are like, I'm leaving now. Get to the door. Go. Fall back asleep. I'm not going to come around and ask you, but that's the invitation, right? That's the instruction, is that we would all have a living, active story. So thinking about that as one of our potential responses to the text and this challenge this morning. The second one there, I think, is this idea of being intentional, because Asaph uses really action-oriented words, and he's quite emphatic. He's calling us as believers to be mindful and purposeful in what we say and how we say it and when we say it and why we say it. We will testify to our children and their children so that they will know how awesome and mighty and powerful and generous and creative and loving and kind and good and faithful he is, so that they too could put their trust in him, so their lives would be radically impacted by the transforming grace of God, so they could live in obedience and submission and surrender to him, so they wouldn't experience the consequences of sinful stubbornness, rebellion and disloyalty like the generations before them. The image that comes to mind when I think about this call to intentionality is that of white water rafting. Has anyone here been white water rafting before? Has anyone ever done it more than once? Oh, wow. Yeah, because I feel like it's just you do it so you say you've done it, and then you just be thankful to Jesus that you made it out alive, and then you move on with something else in your life, right? But I had the privilege of going whitewater rafting in New Zealand with a girlfriend. We're on holidays, and when you get to the spot, the river, they basically just hand you like a wetsuit and a helmet and a paddle, and then you sign a thing that says, yes, I understand I might die. And then, it's like, and then you jump in the boat. But the basic instruction that they give you on land is just listen to the navigator. Right? There's a navigator that hops in this boat with you, and he or she, in my case it was a he will instruct you down the river. Just listen to him and do what he says. And so they lull you because you hop in the boat and it's beautiful. It's like the South Island of New Zealand. It's lush and there's birds and you're just like coasting, and then you come around a corner and it's like death drop. But what we get to that point, and he sort of holds us back and he says, right, see down there where the water's going around that rock and it's kind of, doing these. When we get there, I'm going to call out for you to jump on this side, and we're going to paddle. And when I say, we're going to all go to the back of the boat, and when we're just going to follow his instruction as we go through that particular difficult spot. And then again, you get your heart rate back down again, and then there's another one, and you continue down the river that way. But it's all about listening to the navigator, and it's all about his experience that's going to help us navigate and transverse that well. And I feel like that illustration preaches itself, right? When we're thinking about mentoring and intentional investing in emerging generations and the development of faith, we are called to be navigators in the boats of these people's lives to help them down a river that we've been down before. And I imagine that when we think about this the navigator on my boat, the reason he's giving me or us those instructions is because we tried it this way one time and we all cracked our heads, or we flipped the boat or whatever. So now I know that we'll do it this other way. I've learned from my experience. I tried to get down here one time and there wasn't enough people in the boat, and so we realised we need more people to get through some of these difficult parts of the river. And so this navigator has this desire that we would enjoy and survive, but enjoy our trip down the river, right? That we would learn from his experience, that we would get the most out of our trip down the river because of the wisdom that he's able to give us and the instruction that he can give us. There's other options though, right? He could have just said, there's the river, good luck, right? Or he could have said, oh, you're not allowed on the river, it's too dangerous, stay back from the river, river's banned. But instead, he's like, let me get in this boat with you and let me help you navigate this river. And I think that's something that we are called to be in the lives of emerging generations. And I say this as to you at every generation, because there is a younger generation after you. It doesn't have to be the youngest generation. If we're all younger generation facing, all of the generations get included in this story, right? But we will tell the next generation. We will give some instruction. We'll give some learnings. We'll give some assistance to help these next generation of people through the river of parenting, through the river of working in the marketplace, through the river of navigating life in a secular world. We will jump in the boat and help them down the river. We are called to be intentional, and our young people are crying out for that. And the challenge for us with our younger people is that often it doesn't look like they want our help, and it might not sound like they want our help, and they might not be grateful for our help, right? But anytime young people are polled or surveyed, the cry of their hearts is, would you help me? I want mentorship. I want somebody to invest in my life. I want the wisdom, the experience, the perspective. I want someone to walk with me, encourage me, support me, teach me, champion me, advocate for me, pray for me, learn with me. We're called to be intentional. And then finally, this call to empathy. And if you think about when we're talking about generational change, and Deuteronomy 6 was written in one era and Psalm 78 was written later, and now here we are thousands of years later reflecting on what it is to be one generation passing on faith to another generation, and to be living, as I said, as we are in the 7-generation world. I think about the pace of change. It just seems to escalate. Like, it seems to be moving faster than we can keep up with. These next generations are being described as the first fully global generations, because they're connected through digital devices and they engage through social media, and that makes them culturally diverse because they can work and play and travel across countries and across careers. They've got access to more information in the handheld device than previous generations had in their lifetime. They are the most materially endowed, and they are digitally literate. They stay in education longer. They move out of home later. Now, my own childhood doesn't feel that long ago, but it's a world away from the young life that our young people are experiencing today. This information that they have at their fingertips is there before they have the maturity and the capacity to decipher and interpret it. Young people are exploring Christian faith as just one of many religions and worldviews that are offered to them. There's a barrage of social media messages that attacks their sense of self, their sense of identity, purpose, value, worth. They need help understanding the timeless message of Jesus in a really changing time. This world of personalised consumer experiences, that we have this sacrificial, others-first, life-surrendering call of the gospel is arguably more countercultural than it's ever been. And so for our young people to receive this message of the praiseworthy God, it requires our empathetic engagement with the realities of the path that they're trying to walk. We can too easily criticize what we don't understand. You know, the opposite to empathy is judgment. It's judgment. You know, anytime we criticize what we don't understand, or when anytime we sort of other the other, we create this gap of connection and a gap of compassion that causes us to lose our voice and our influence. So anytime we hear people saying, those young people, or ourselves we're tempted to make these general sweeping statements, we want to remember that those young people are made up of individual human souls who are desperately in need of, the gospel of Jesus and our investment in them, that they're trying to navigate the life around them, and that the story we see is just part of it. There's things behind the things, right? There's a story underneath that's feeding the decisions and the actions that they make. And when we generalize or we stereotype or caricature young people, we can other them. We can create a distance to them. When I was younger, I used to keep books of poetry. I still have them. I don't know why, because they're an interesting read. When I was a teenager, I didn't journal, but I wrote poems. So it's next level journaling, basically. And I have this one book that has this big long blur of a poem that I'd written when I had broken up with a boyfriend. I would have been about 15 years old. I'd broken up with a boyfriend. I'm waiting for the empathy. Thank you. That's better. And good, you passed the test. But it was like a long-term relationship, because it's like 6 weeks. So, empathy. Yeah, thank you. That's better. Don't judge what you don't understand. So I'd broken up with this boy and I'd pouring out my heart. And the closing line of this poem says, "People tell me to get on with my life, but he was my life." I know. So, next page, next day, different boy. "He smiled at me today" is the opening line. Miraculous recovery, it's all good, don't worry, stand down, I'm fine, I'm back, right? But if I think about Kimmy, 15-year-old Kimmy, if that was me today, that would have been all over my social media. I would have shared every step of that story publicly, right? At least to a group of friends, potentially to a broader audience, because who knows where that stuff goes. And I would have been, pouring out this dramatic, romantic, breakup story into the ether and inviting response from so many people around me, and also from people whose prefrontal cortex wasn't developed either. And so they're not any more emotionally mature than I am, and yet they're the ones who are going to try and help me through this thing, right? And then the next day to see the change of story and even the story that people would have said about me if they had seen that in a more public way. And just that one little vignette of my own life experience moves me to the deepest of empathy for our young people, because they are navigating a world that we didn't have to navigate. They've got all of the same things of becoming teenagers and young adults and finding their way in the world, but they've got all these other things that are imposing themselves into that space and are shaping the way they experience it. And for me, it makes me ask, help me understand that. How can I help you through that? How can I get in your boat and help you navigate down that? I haven't been in the digital space as a 15-year-old, but I have been 15, and if you can help me understand the bits I don't know, I reckon we could work this through together. We're called to be empathetic to the stories and to the experiences of the generations after us. Empathy is a muscle that we need to keep developing if we're going to stay close, to stay within hearing distance of these emerging generations. It's how we close the gap in life stage and experience. We seek first to understand. We filter stories that we hear and the things that we see through this grid of empathy, and then it grows in us, this sensitivity, and I think it ought to grow then in us a greater urgency to support our young people to grow in wisdom and discernment and understanding. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done. Let me lead us in a bit of a response time or a time of reflecting on this. So I encourage you to close your eyes, bow your head, whatever you need to do just to get a bit of space, and maybe to be bold enough to ask God, what is it that you're saying to me this morning, God? What do you want me to hear from this message today? How do you want me to respond? Where's the place that he's putting his finger on in your life, in your world, and your circumstances? Perhaps there's the encouragement around this idea of testimony. Are we building a current, living, active testimony? Are we looking for the activity of God in our lives today? Are we listening to stories? Are we sharing stories with one another? Maybe it's this piece of intentionality where you thought your days of river riding were over, but this invitation to jump in and to help younger people, next generations, to navigate rivers that we've already been down before. Maybe God's bringing to mind names and faces of people that you have already existing relationship or capacity for relationship that might give you permission to be in the navigator's seat. Maybe it's just the niggle of the reminder around empathy. We desired that God would forgive us for the times where we've judged instead of sought to understand. And God, as you do this work in each of our lives this morning, as you raise to our attention that which you would have us respond to, we say thank you that you are the God of all generations. We thank you for the people who have passed faith down to us, that we are the recipients of this living, active story of God at work in the lives of his people. God, we're grateful for a church and a church community and that has the opportunity to be truly intergenerational and to look like your family and to be to one another exactly what you designed family to be. That we would be mindful that we stand between generations, that our story that you are writing is just part of your bigger story with this incredible invitation and opportunity we have to be part of it. God, would you, as each of us just think to respond, as we think about what it means to walk these things out in our day-to-day lives, as we think about how it is that we need to keep being willing to change and to be sensitive to your promptings, we look to you to see what you're going to do as a result, that what you're going to do in this community, what you're going to do in our families with willing hearts and obedient responses. And we ask that in your Son's name. Amen. Amen.